Well, thank you all for being here. I know this is going to be a really interesting conversation because we have such an incredible wealth of artistry and creativity here on the stage. And we're going to start with Nishi, who, as we have heard, is a playwright, a poet, a writer, but also a filmmaker, which I find intriguing, especially because that came a little bit later in your career. And we're going to start by actually showing a trailer for one of her recent films, The Peace Activist. So we'll have a little sample of what that filmmaking is like.
The tree of life suffers irrevocable changes, but it gets stronger gradually.
Gandhi. And are you not the famous Martin Luther King?
You may know of him, Henry David Thoreau.
Lord, it took me 2 years at Walden Pond to learn this truth.
I tried. We both tried. That, to me, is success.
What's wrong with the idea of having regrets? When I was alive, I believed in tending and cherishing them. They really went after you, Martin.
They did. There was a time to identify me as the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation.
You can never feel what I can as a woman who does not earn.
Gandhi, I wanted to show the world the more power. It did not matter.
Martin, we will always matter.
There will be many Gandhis and Martin Luther Kings who will come and fight.
You see, you were one of the great Christians of the 20th century.
Brown bodies, black bodies.
The FBI director was obsessed about.
I do not have any personal agenda at all. People of color, people from poor communities, do we still need rallies?
Where are we today? Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Oh, God.
So the trailer for The Peace Activist, written and directed by Nishi. Why film? Why, after having worked so much in poetry, in other forms of literature, in plays as well, playwriting, why did you want to get into film? And just to actually give some context, what that film does is it imagines Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi and Henry David Thoreau meeting and really contemplating non-violent struggle, and then also contemplating in the modern context of what's happening politically. So why did you want to explore those very deep themes through filmmaking, having had such deep roots in other parts of in literature?
Thank you for asking me the question, Maeve. Well, your destiny always finds you, and it does seem like an incongruous mixture. My teaching career of 4 decades, and along with it, writing 7 collections of poems, 10 plays, and 2 novels. My creative journey actually started about 30 years ago. When I came to this country, I kind of, wrote 2 novels, one of which coincided with 9/11, the publication, and it's also about a terrorist. One man's terrorist is another man's patriot. The second is, it's a human silicon chip. And then I subsequently wrote a lot of poetry, intertwined it with plays. And some of my plays, my movies are actually based off my plays. And I did, of course, have to rewrite them as screenplays in order to kind of get the right kind of, trappings for a film. It was a huge learning curve for me. The immediacy, the intimacy that you sense in movie making is somewhat, of course, I would imagine it's like a bridge, the overarching themes and the kind of framework of all of my writings is just about the same. And it's a lot to do with changing the world, changing the hierarchical nature of the world. And writing films came to me just around the pandemic, during the lockdown, when we were actually rehearsing specifically to address the question you asked me. We were actually rehearsing for a play mixed up about interracial love, and the pandemic struck. My actors actually wanted it to be screened because they were all theater and movie actors, unknown, but they had a lot of fire in their bellies. And we got the right cinematographer to actually film it. I actually got a lot of success. It's still streaming on Amazon Prime, and that kind of prompted me to make a movie soon after about another play I had written. Do you want me to go on, or would you?
I would love you to go on, but in the interests of time, I fear we won't, but we will circle back. But your poetry, your playwriting, and your films all touch on very deep social issues. And this actually will tie into the other panellists that we have. But just before we move on, Nishi, your latest collection of poetry, Random Circles of Belief, you are delving into very contemporary social issues that are playing out in every country, but really right here in the US, whether it's racial identity or, there's a poem in there about arranged marriages. Do you find that different genres lend themselves to exploring some of these very contentious issues, delicate issues, in ways that are better than others? Can you delve into things in poetry that maybe might be a little bit harder in film or visual context?
Within the landscape of writing, various genres, a writer has to, of course, adapt oneself to the specific techniques, the structural elements, the writing, the expectations of the reader or the audience also, as one, of course, moves from. There are definite shifts and changes a writer has to adapt oneself to. For instance, writing poetry, the economy, the precision, the kind of deftness that one has to write within a very narrow space and canvas. That kind of would not perhaps resonate with stagecraft, which requires the sharpness of good dialogue, which requires the immediacy of action, and of course the 3 C's of character, conflict, so to say, and how they need to be navigated. And novel writing is, of course, a slow and a larger canvas, a larger roadmap with which a writer, writing across multiple genres, has to somehow understand. And there is time for developing characters, there's time for thinking about themes, and time for perhaps there may be broader room, so to say, for thinking about setting also. But filmmaking has its different, so to say, parameters or requirements where you need that kind of immediacy, so to say, the kind of, there's no room for excess in filmmaking. It also requires that kind of close connection, interconnection between sound and action and auditory and storytelling frameworks. So, kind of navigating these challenging genres can have their own specific challenges for any writer desiring to, wanting to, or kind of, planning to master various art forms.
Well, Laura, your work also touches on very contemporary social themes that are very urgent, mostly environmental issues, the climate crisis, but also things like immigration and the intersection, actually, of so many of those issues that we're currently dealing with. You have also written across genres insofar as you do long form, short form, novels, fiction and non-fiction. So in the context of all of the different genres that you write in, do you find one lends itself better, or what are some of the advantages of one over the other in exploring some of those complex themes?
Thank you. I think climate chaos, climate change, planet Earth, that is my primary concern and core of all the storytelling I want to do. And it's being done well in nonfiction. I feel like where it's lacking is in fiction. And so I've wanted, and I consider myself primarily a fiction writer, and so I've been pulling it into all of my core themes. I mean, a novel is there to tell a compelling story, but if my characters are learning to be better stewards of the planet along the way, then I think the fiction for me right now is where the energy is at to get these stories in, delightful tales of characters, through their arc. So,
I mean, I do wonder about that so many of these issues that the scientific community have really not been able to make inroads in terms of people taking action or people sensing the urgency that action needs to be taken. So we know that presenting statistics and data isn't honing in on that urgency in terms of translating into action, and yet art seems to really play a big role in that. Can you talk a little bit about that, the role of the artist, the role of the writer, in explaining these issues in a way that can resonate with people, maybe on an emotional level, that maybe then action could be taken?
I think it's one of the heartbreaks of many people's lives is that the scientists have known about climate change and climate chaos and the role fossil fuels was playing. They've known for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but that wasn't being conveyed in any kind of significant way that for the general public. And putting story to science is something I'm always teaching, because I just don't think people change their lives because of facts. They change their lives because of stories. And my life was changed because of stories set elsewhere where I could enter worlds that were new to me. And so absolutely, I think if there is hope for humanity and for the planet, it is through the artists' paths, whether it's on the screen that was so beautiful, or through fiction, or through photography. And I'd like to think that the choir will get louder and louder and louder until everyone is listening, at least on the periphery, and it will be the artists, I think.
Well, I'd like to bring in Ramya, because your book is beautiful. And we're going to have you hold it up because there's a story even in the actual physicality of the book itself. We heard in the introduction about the spine of the book. This was hand-woven, embroidered?
Hand-embroidered.
It should be on, I think, if you talk directly.
It's hand-embroidered.
And 2,000 of these were made because it's a limited edition, hand-done. How long did that take?
The spines itself, maybe a year or so, but the book was in the making for 9 years. So while I'm not a career writer, I am a visual artist. And firstly, I want to say that I'm really happy to bring a piece of my mountains into this mountain land.
Well, we should explain what the mountains are. Yes. And these are known in English as the Blue Mountains, but it's
Blue Mountains in India. Nilgiris.
Nilgiris. And
yes,
the book is the soul of the Nilgiris. So I'd love you to just, from one mountain town to another, explain what this region is in southern India and why you wanted to tell the stories of the people who live there.
So I live in the south of India, in Bangalore. And I went to the Nilgiris nearly 2 decades ago as a student of photography. And little did I know that I would make it my home. And the Nilgiris sit in one of the most ancient mountain ranges in the world, the Western Ghats. anywhere between 3,000 and 500 million years old, very, very ancient. And the Western Ghats are a designated UNESCO biodiversity hotspot. There are only 36 biodiversity hotspots, and with the incredible degree of endemism that is found by way of flora and fauna, it is an incredible biodiversity hotspot where the mountains of the Nilgiris are located. And the Nilgiris is incredibly magical, needless to say, and the biosphere is home to over 25 indigenous communities. And though my interactions through this book have been with 5 communities, so as you can already see, I have a very long way to go. I've barely scraped the surface. So with this one volume that took quite a bit of my lifetime. And so why did it take this long? I'm a visual artist, as I just mentioned, and I wanted to explore this beautiful region, the mountains. I am a daughter of the mountains, and I started to explore it photographically. And 2 things happened along the way that were very defining in changing the trajectory of what I was doing with this project. And one was, at that point I was reading the works of lots of explorers and nature writers like Wade Davis, Robert McFarlane, Peter Matheson, and so on, all mountain explorers. And there was something that Wade Davis had said in one of his books, or I don't know if it was a TED Talk. He said, only if we can establish a sense of place and a deep connection to one place can we redefine our relationship to Earth. And I don't know why, but that stayed with me because in my early 20s and seeking, as a seeker, I didn't know where I was going with this. So that really held, that was fundamentally changed how I was seeing it. And then sometime afterwards, I started to interact with the indigenous communities, to photograph them. Then as I was curious, I didn't know where that would take me. And some of these communities are very ancient. And many of the elders who are at the heart of this book, on whose shoulders this book rests, are no more. So in the 9 years that I spent there, I had the privilege of being very close to them. So why 9 years? Because I went in as a photographer, and I quickly realized that this is not going to be the way in. And this takes me back to something Pico Iyer said today. You are in a place as a something like this, tourist or a pilgrim. But for me, I had to go in there as a pupil. And that changed everything. Because once, when I went in with my camera, one of the elders, she's a healer, from a forest-dwelling community called the Kurumbas, who live in deep forest. And she said to me that she's very reticent. Healers are reticent. She was also a shaman. And she said, you're going to take whatever you want, like the rest of them, and leave. So the next time I went back to her, I went without a camera. And that's how I would say the journey started. And in the indigenous world, as I would learn, you take what is given to you. And with the knowledge keepers, know what to do. You leave it to them. And that takes time. So they see what you understand of their ways. For instance, within a year of going in there and meeting them without my camera, it was very hard for a photographer, trust me. And I had to do this many times over. And that meant something to them, that here's a student. And that's how relationships got built. And I was slowly, gradually invited in and allowed to write about it, to photograph them. And it became as much the project of the communities that I was working with as it was mine. In fact, at some point it wasn't me anymore. You know, it was too long and I was too entrenched. And that's how this happened too, you know.
Well, it is way more than a photography project. Of course, it is filled with most incredible, beautiful photographs, but it also has oral narratives, it has conversations, it has interviews. And so did you find using the different genres and then actually having them participate in the creation of the book physically with that beautiful embroidery, that lent itself to then it not being just an anthropological exercise where you're going in and documenting this?
You know, when I started digging deeper and going into research, one thing that as a budding writer and a researcher myself, the lack of access to young people, this was a decade ago, right? And to find documentation done by academicians and anthropologists, it was nearly impossible. So I had to go into all kinds of university archives and JSTOR, and it was impossible. And a lot of the time, the academic language was impenetrable, you know. So no offense to academics, but I was between the rock and a hard place every time I opened the works of some of the anthropologists, and I did have the good privilege of meeting some of them, and they believed in what I was doing. One of them lives in San Jose, Paul Hawkins. He is what they call the father of Nilgirology. I don't think something like this exists, and I'd like to contest that, but I did meet Professor Paul Hawkins, who has done tremendous amount of research and written volumes of books about the ethnosphere of the Nilgiris and its communities, specifically one community. And so I delved into all of this, and I had to find my language. And that happened because I started meeting and interacting and staying with the communities, with the elders. So I had those conversations to give me all the stories and everything I needed. Of course, the academics did help me vet the facts. But when it comes to orature, one thing that struck me again and again as I was interacting with the communities is because I was here taking these pieces of ballads and poetry and healing notes from the healers, for example, and trying to convert it into a language of my privilege, when in fact it did not need to be written or spoken about in that way. It was carried forth very beautifully and very differently. So a lot of the time I have translated quite a few of some of the ballads especially, but they're not meant to be written in the way I have presented in the book, though I was very happy to have done it. So yes, it spanned all of this, these translations and field trips and conversations and intimate encounters with many of the elders who are no more but are in this book. They are enshrined in this. And the embroidery part started because the Todas are the most ancient community there, the oldest, and dwindling in fact now. No more than 1,500 of the Toda community remains in those hills. They live in the highest reaches of the highlands, close to the forests and peaks, their deity peaks. And the women of the community practice this GI tagged black and red embroidery. And this is the community I continue to work with very closely, with textile interventions and so on, preserving what we can. And I was very interested in the patterns of the embroidery. And, you know, when you start working with indigenous people so closely, you start to realize, and if you're outside of the academics, in fact, I think that served me very well because I could see the maps and the paths and the dots and the constellations and the patterns in their work in a way that they were showing me. So that was very beautiful. And even with the embroidery, as we started to explore deeper and deeper and deeper, I just wanted these patterns to mark every book. That was, yeah.
Well, we're going to have all the panelists read from their work so we get a sense of it. And actually, while we've been talking about the Nilgiris, can you go ahead and read a little passage from the book and tell us what it is?
There are many passages I'd like to read out, but there's one that, the two things that I'm going to touch down upon. One is a passage from the concluding chapter, A Call to Connect. Now, this was my takeaway from why I did this project. In all my conversations with the elders from different Nilgiri indigenous communities, there was one recurrent theme: the importance of adhering to seasonal cycles because sustenance depends on it. The stories, knowledge, and worldviews of indigenous peoples answer urgent questions about long-term sustenance. Sadly, Aboriginal societies with subsistent levels of production are seldom a part of the mainstream culture of their community. Although they contribute to its cultural wealth, they are invariably pushed aside to make way for a version of progress we've all unimaginatively given into. The rich diversity of humanity, our worldviews, unique perspectives contribute to our collective human experience. As anthropologist Wade Davis writes, this is not to suggest that we mimic the ways of the indigenous people, but simply recognize that our way of thinking is just one of the many that emerged from one set of historical and cultural circumstances. Going beyond patronizing and exoticizing, as is often how tribal communities are treated, those from our other communities, that's ours, have the power to preserve indigenous culture and ancient wisdom. This would be a gift to ourselves and our children. I started this book when I started this. There is one a flower called the kurunji, which is endemic to that region, biosphere. It blooms once in 12 years. So when I started this project, it was just after that one kurunji cycle that had occurred. It carpets the hills in swathes of purple. It's a type of Strobilanthus. And I had missed that cycle, and I thought I will long have finished this book before the next one occurs. But I finished this book 6 months before the next cycle. So that was nearly 10 years. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Well, we're going to have, as I said, everybody read a selection. Nishi, I'd love for you to read a poem from your latest collection, Random Circles of Belief. And just while you're getting that set up, I found this book just so of the moment because there's so much exploration around racial identity. There's actually one particular book in there, and I'll say the name of it, and I think it's going to resonate with everyone. It's called Racial Laughter, and it's about a woman's laugh and its connection to, I suppose, her identity. And it got me thinking of our current dialogue and analysis of somebody's laughter in the political sphere. So there's a lot of exploration on that. But tell us this particular poem that you're going to read now. Oh, there you go. And I have that one.
It's just a recently published collection published in...
We'll have you hold your microphone.
My 7th collection of poetry, Random Circles of Belief, was published in Massachusetts by a publisher called Human Error, publishing house called Human Error Publishing. It addresses issues of race and religion. I'm going to read to you a poem called Fairy Tale City with No Color. When a colorless time comes a-running, the mind within my colored soul snapped, shuddering. A house full of gorgeous memories ran, opened up, escaped into the dungeon of virgin, color-free words that slipped from me in visceral wounds, merging into self-inflicted collages, colored hate. As the shelled sun and the hissing moon became one, as the morning melted with the sky, shed a thickened smoke, wore a spring-like veil, hung in deafening depths, table-swift digitized manner, until a no-color engine reached the weirdmost recesses of impending, restless night, snoring aloud its troubles, doomed in many colors. We blend into the colors of our mother's unused veils, numb as the footsteps that carry alone a weighted gaze, amber and yellow accusations, like a bounty of intimate sorrows staying adrift in a strange relationship with the colors of our souls, our past creeping into our skins with no use value, a sense of buried alleyways, blurred by us, darkened, deliberately denying, let loose by a superfluous sense of control, trauma of our wombs placed in the time bombs of colorless grief, choked by freezing violence that blooms on the heads of trees, drifting away, trapped in mystic missing tones, chafing beyond the hope of another failure, growling, prowling, changing ownership, unpossessed by smiling faces that alter their customs and cultures. Migrant passages leave no trace of eternity, no harbors nor any open seas, only faces dreaming of a colorless city with no color. Thank you.
Is there something about poetry that maybe it's the fact that you have to be so precision? There's such a level of precision that's needed in the writing because you have to distill all of your ideas into these words. Every word has got to be so carefully selected that just, obviously, this is your 7th collection of poetry. So what is it about poetry then that attracts you so much, and what is the possibility for us to lean into poetry more, to explore some of these issues that are very difficult for us to have regular conversations around?
Just as filmmaking is a different beast altogether, poetry making, of course, demands a deep understanding of meter, nuance, rhythm, language, the power of language, the resonance of language, metaphor, all of that is very important for poetry to work like a kind of, flint knife going through the marrow into the bone of our human truths. So, very often poetry can be related to or is associated with metaphysical thinking, with spiritual thinking. So you have, the hymns of the Rig Vedas to the Psalms of the Bible, and also, Rumi, and, there were some mystic writers, all of that. So there is a spiritual and metaphysical angle to writing, but my poetry is not really about, it's about it's like a kaleidoscope of social rhythms about a human culture, so to say, the texture of our social lives, of how we think and how we kind of, don't think alike. So poetry resonates to me and comes back to me when I have this deep burning desire to kind of unhouse myself, to kind of, make of myself a literary exile, which transplantation, my cultural transplantation, 30 or 35 years ago. I'm an American citizen now, but it does to a lot of people from India, moving from India to the United States, did unhouse me, did rehouse me, make a literary exile out of me. And when I face that sense of double consciousness about myself, I return to poetry. It is a more specialized craft than many other forms of writing within the literary landscape.
Well, Laura, we're going to have you read something, and this is actually from Playing with Wildfire. And we talked earlier about how Laura has written across genres, fiction, non-fiction, short form, long form. What's so incredible about Playing with Wildfire, which is a novel, set in the recent past here in Colorado against the backdrop of, I think, what is still, it's hard to tell with the records around wildfire size, the largest and most destructive wildfire in the state's history, and it's something Laura herself lived through. Not only does Laura write across genres, in this particular book, there's so many different elements, and there's a lot of non-narrative elements that I think really lend itself to the storytelling. There's grant application, there are obituaries, there are astrology reports, and then there are so many different perspectives. And so we'll talk about going across all of those different tapestries, really. But the particular part you're going to read is from one of the non-human perspectives. It's from the perspective of animals. So go ahead and read.
Thank you. Yeah, this book is set as wildfire is coming into a town in Colorado, and everyone is choosing whether or not to evacuate, and it's told from the point of view of adults and teenagers and children, and a little, but how crazy to think humans are the only one affected. So I wanted to give some of the chapters to animals and non-human creatures, and this one, I'll just read two short segments from the point of view of two of Colorado's best animals, the moose and the bear. This is the moose. That creature standing there so forlorn, lorn these last years, but only because that creature has forgotten how to be. And the moose is looking at a human who's passing because of the fire, who's dying. And the moose says, but only because that creature has forgotten how to be, how to stand in meadow and tilt head to grass and wildflower. And now she sinks and we both feel cut, slice, fear. And I do not want to go dark either, because all creatures equal sharp desire to live, the desire to breathe, the desire to put hoof to earth or wing to air. My great knees buckle at the same time the creature falls too. Out of air, we both go down. I have ancient feeling of standing in rain, nose in flowers. And here's the bear's point of view. And it was just a fiery truth that every creature, every one of them, all connected, all of them, all creatures could sense, and thus had known this was coming. But only some could do something about it. The wild creatures were dependent on the tame creatures, and those creatures failed. A den is now needed, a new den, new, but it's all black, smoldering, and so she noses her aching paw, burned on black, and sleeps in a cottonwood crook by the river, dreaming of eating rose hips in a green meadow in spring.
To me, that's very poetic, and apologies to the professional poet here on the stage. I'm going to probably butcher some of the terms, but the meter in that, the language, how it's presented, that to me, it's like I said, it's very poetic. Why did you want to have so many different perspectives in that and so many different forms? We have the traditional narrative that's telling the story. We have, as you described there, the multiple perspectives. But as I mentioned earlier, you also have these, official documents, a grant application, I think police report, an astrology report. Why did you want to have that entire tapestry as part of the story?
I think because wildfire and climate change are so chaotic, and there's all sorts of sparks being sent out everywhere, and this is my way of trying to capture those sparks that are unexpected and bizarre and unusual, trying to capture those metaphorical sparks on the page by telling each point of view of each creature who's narrating in a very different form, very experimental, some flash, some poetry, some play, some just different forms of, for example, one story told in the point of view of a grant application or an obituary, because that is how wildfire feels, and that is how we feel in climate change, I think. There's hurricanes, there's blizzards, there's polar bears, there's insects, there's bees who need our protection, and it feels so very chaotic, and I wanted to render that on the page.
The fact that you were writing from a non-human perspective, to me, is a perfect example of why fiction and just art in general is such an important way to explore these issues, because we're not going to get a news report from the perspective of the animals. We might get data points, but very often we're not. We're not even reporting on how many animals are killed in wildfires, what is the non-human impact of the climate crisis. We're getting those reports really in economics. It's how many houses were burned, how many structures, and then of course the human element, how many people were displaced. So to me, the fact that you were able to bring in the animal, the non-human perspective is so vitally important, because that's what's missing in so much of what we're talking about when we talk about the climate crisis.
Absolutely. I think, to my mind, what art is a request that we extend our empathy. And it's such a mistake to think that people are born empathetic and some people aren't empathetic. No, we grow in empathy. And fiction, for me, is what made my empathetic reach grow, and I hope it will continue to grow. And so by narrating from other points of view, we can extend our empathy to bears and to moose and the trees who burned, and to realize, like, oh, suffering is everywhere, and how can I best live my life to recognize and empathize and perhaps do something for these other creatures.
Well, I think we're going to invite questions. We have a microphone here, if anybody has a question. If not, I've got plenty more questions. But please raise your hand. Go.
My question is to Ramya. I'm wondering about those indigenous communities that you met. Lately, I've been hearing that there's an interest in learning from indigenous communities how to have conflict resolution, and they're learning this in the Amazon in Brazil. Did you come across any of these kind of topics? That topic when you were there, and I'm wondering what those communities are seeing. That's, as far as globally, what are they foreseeing? What are they seeing? Any kind of perspectives in that?
Thank you. Many perspectives on many things, but where conflict is concerned, I'm afraid the system in India doesn't give them the time of day. So unfortunately, we've not yet gotten there in listening to them, with us examining our systems through an indigenous worldview lens. But
have you hold your microphone? Is it?
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's off. There we go. Sorry.
You didn't hear me? No. Thank you for your question. There are many layers to this, and there are so many. There were so many takeaways for me. Since you pointed out at the example of the conflict resolutions that are being that governments are looking at from these communities. Well, that we haven't yet gotten there in my country. The government, unfortunately, is still yet to go a long way in giving the time of day to the indigenous communities in this particular regard of examining the global systems, their systems through the indigenous lens. So, but then as gatekeepers of the forest, as the custodians of certain knowledge systems, there has been a lot of interest, especially where conservation is concerned. And through their stories and their tellings and so on, the community leaders are being brought in as, for instance, barefoot ecologists to work alongside the scientists, and that is happening a lot in India, which is incredible. And any entity strong on conservation will have indigenous members in there, especially with forests and animals and wildlife and are concerned. Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. This is a question for the whole panel. I think the world is very much in need of the types of work that you do that blends ideas, and I mean this in a good way. Sometimes blending doesn't come out right, but and that's sort of at the confluence of different genres, different formats, different perspectives. I'm curious what you found was if you hit any obstacles in your quest to get the work out there, and if the obstacles that you hit or the reasons you were given for perhaps your work not being ushered out there match what reader reactions have been.
Anybody like to go first? Nishi?
Sure. The trajectory of any writer, you could kind of, any writer would vouch for, is full of disappointments, rejections, failures. And, I turn back, I have published about 14 books. And if I had, now looking back, these past 4 decades, if I had published, my 15th book will soon be published, if I had published 15 novels, perhaps I would have been in better standing as a writer. Kind of people listen to fiction versus, writing plays. I've written 10 plays. They've got staged. One of them also reached off-Broadway. There are 12 productions of my play Kasturba versus Gandhi, and there's another play. Somebody, a theater icon in India, does it all the time, and she takes it to Delhi University colleges also. So playwriting, it by itself, so to say, it's kind of challenging. Writing each play, and then you get it on the stage. It has been staged in the Washington, D.C. area, where I come from. It has been staged in Chicago, and now, of course, recently, I'd completely forgotten when someone asked me for the script about a year ago, and lo and behold, it's on off-Broadway, so it's kind of, certainly great. But then when it comes to getting my plays published, then, they have been published now, like about 7 of my plays in 2 books, Unchaining, Decolonizing the Mind, and there's another, trio of history plays. But getting them published is certainly such a huge challenge. If you want me to go on and talk about how to make movies, I did everything myself. It has been so challenging. So we can discuss ad infinitum the fluidity, the intersections of how these great genres, so to say, meet and coalesce. But when it comes to the publishing industry, it's a whole ball game, a whole different beast altogether. So the challenges, the difficulties are certainly there. Perhaps you could talk about.
As cliched as it sounds, I would say the biggest obstacle to the work I was doing was how I was thinking about it in the beginning. And once I got over that, was seeing this through the lens of photography. And then to get into the uncharted territories of completely different worldviews from what I had been raised in, and starting from scratch as a pupil to get there, that was a painful process. And then there was publishing this book. It was almost picked up by a publisher, and the conflict was this part, the art donning this book, and they had a lot of issues with that. And I had to take the hard decision to pull away and do it myself. So.
I'll just mention briefly that I had another book come out, and this is a standard narrative, upmarket book about a woman breaking into homes as she travels across the United States. And it was published by Penguin Random House, and I'm very proud of it, but there's no way Penguin Random House would publish this book. It's just too experimental, too literary. They think it's weird. And the sales in this country reflect that. And I wish people were buying different books and buying books of poetry and books of photography, but this is more what sells. I love this book, but it's not. I had to go with a smaller independent literary press with this book, and so bless them.
A question for Ramya Reddy. As a photographer, I see a lament in your comments about having missed the Kurunji every 12 years. And two-pronged question. I was just Googling and reading about there was a 6-year period where it happened this year, every year apparently. And more interestingly, I'm thinking or planning my next visit to the Nilgiris, and I'm reminded of what Pico Iyer and the panel there was discussing about the tourists overcrowding a glorious event or a beautiful event. And is that an issue in terms of overcrowding if I plan to go there sometime in the future?
It's a big issue. You're most welcome, but it is a big issue, and as it really resonated when Pico Iyer spoke about. Somebody asked him that question about this peril of over-tourism, and Nilgiris is how shall we say? I mean, it's impossible to go there when it's a peak tourist season for visitors. So it's an overkill. But if you want to see the Kurunji the next cycle, there are many places in the Western Ghats where you can enjoy it. There are spots in the Nilgiris where you can enjoy it without being in the central locations. So, yeah.
An afterthought, is there a photograph or more than one of Kurunji?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, there is one.
I will say Ramya's got the most beautifully curated Instagram account that has fabulous photographs from the book as well. So
Thank you. Thank you.
That's somewhere you can also go and see a lot of these photos.
I just had a quick question about, this is for Ramya. How did you communicate with with this local, because the Todas are like very elusive, sort of, they're very kind of in their own, very reclusive community. And so, how did you communicate with them? Meaning language, did you have to learn the language? Did you have an interpreter?
I was very lucky in that I know how to speak Tamil. Tamil is the state language. So I can speak a few South Indian languages, and Tamil is one of them. So they're all comfortable with Tamil. The Toda language is, I've spent a lot of time with them, but I cannot speak more than a few words. So it's a very exotic, exquisite Dravidian language of very ancient origins. It's very hard to pick up on it. So the bridge was Tamil.
We'll get you the microphone. It's just behind you there.
Nishi, what was the results of the movie, The Peace Activist? Did you get, what kind of feedback did you get?
Well, 3 of my 4 movies are streaming on Amazon Prime. I've been extremely lucky in getting a distributor who, in fact, introduced Keanu Reeves, and he keeps all the money. I invested, I wrote, I directed, I was the costume designer, I chose all the locations, I did everything, I wrote the songs also. And for the 4th, I have an Indian distributor who is promising, but it's been almost a year. It does go to some film festivals. It has been shown in public libraries as well as in certain museums also, and it will be shown at the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C., where I come from. So there is some hope for it. And once it goes to a distributor, it does take some time. It should be on one of the streaming platforms in the United States, Amazon Prime, United States, UK, and Canada. So, he tried in India. He went to Mumbai, and he did try in India. And it kind of, he was asking me a huge amount of money to edit it all together. And, once it's in the hands of someone, who's kind of my way of writing, my movies are very art house, kind of nuanced, subtle, gentle, not loud in the face kind of movies. They are not meant for entertainment. They are kind of, meant for, to ask socially, they're based on social issues, they address social issues, and they ask questions which may perhaps push the boundaries of my readers' minds. So in India, he did not meet with any success. He tried, and editors could, of course, at the risk of losing the tempo, the subtle pace, the nuanced pace at which I wanted to make the movie. And I actually sat down with the editor and, just the right shots, the right tempo, everything. I wanted it my way. So independent filmmaking is very challenging. I invested, barring some minor grants which I got from Maryland State or from, my county. It's like, my own money I put into all my 4 movies. The actors that were theater actors, very well known. Now, this movie I have made, The Peace Activists. He's a well-known, who acted as Gandhi. He's a well-known theater actor. He used to come from New Jersey, spend the night at my house, at our house, and, we would film it every weekend. But someone told me, there's another professor like me. I've been a professor at the University of Maryland for 20 years now. There's another professor who's made, Suman Ghosh, who's made about 10 movies. Every year he makes a movie. He's made a movie, on Kabliwala with this very well-known Bollywood actor or Tollywood or Collywood actor called Mithu Chakrabarti in his 70s. Now, if you have a guy like Mithu Chakrabarti, acting as Kabliwala, and now he's made a movie with Sharmila Tagore, one of the iconic film actors, so he gets his money from Geo Entertainment. I saw that on IMDb, and I asked him, because I know him as a colleague, and, he's way up there now. So I asked him, how did you get funding from Geo Entertainment, the Ambani Group? I don't ask anyone for money. I spend my own money, whatever little money, and my husband and I are kind of, retired now. So, but whatever money I had earned, I did put into it. Not a penny have I got back. So independent filmmaking is very challenging, very difficult. I don't hope to get any, in spite of the fact that all my movies, and even this one, The Peace Activists, should be on Amazon Prime or on Netflix, or at least on Hulu, or, I think Hulu and another streaming platform, they show better movies, so HBO perhaps, but he will. But they usually keep all the money, which is all right. My actors who know it, the actor who acted as Thoreau, he's very well known, Matt Gulbranson. He's acted in every big Hollywood movie, sorry, I'm getting confused. He's acted in every Hollywood movie you can think of, but he gets tiny bit roles. And he said, Nishi, just stay quiet. He kind of guides me and counsels me, along with my husband, of course, who's the sage. And he kind of, he told me if a distributor is willing to take your movie, just let him keep it, because money is not important for me. I didn't make movies for the sake of making any money out of it. I made it because I was passionate about certain things I wanted to communicate. So, the canvas shifted, but the medium, it has changed somewhat for me. But the reasons for my writing poetry or plays or novels or filmmaking has been the same. So I never focus on money. I try to focus on what I have to communicate. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid we are out of time, but I would like to thank our three panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.